tickled kind of just a second ago when I was talking to Kyle. You know, they were out this morning, and when I was pointing at Kyle, he thought I was asking if he needed to take the Lord's Supper, and I was asking if he was going to take care of it, because I knew Naomi wasn't here. And Kyle kind of looked strange, like, well, I need to take it. It's like, and I thought, well, Kyle, you know, everybody in the morning that serves needs to take it too. So more than that don't make no difference. appreciate him and his willingness to fill in, do those types of things for us. And by the way, let me just say at the outset, we had a really good first meeting for our budget, and Kyle and Ryan sat in with us and had a really good, I think had a really good start to making our plans for 2020. And let me just say one thing, and I know this is on the video for the church, but one thing that we plan to do this year that will be a little bit different than previous years is, well, actually we'll do two things slightly different. In the past, what we've done is we've sat down and we've sat down and proposed, you know, everything that we want to do, and then we come out and present the whole thing to the congregation and just ask the congregation to you know, to fund it, basically. You know, in other words, you know, we need, you know, we give this much each week. We need this much each week. That adds up to such and such amount per person per week. What we want to try to do, and intend to do this year is, rather than do it and present it to you, is we want to present it to you and then get the church's blessing to do it. You know, we've been talking about those things on Sunday morning about, you know, how we work together and do things as a congregation. So rather than presenting it to you and asking you to support it, what we want to do is, first of all, we want to ask you to approve it and then to support it. And if there's anything that's in it that doesn't need to be in it, or if, you know, if something is too much or whatever, then we can make adjustments. And so what we want is, we want this to be a truly congregational effort with regard to our program of work for 2020, and we've already got things also for 2021 that we've been talking about, and some stuff long term. And so that's the plan that we're going to pursue this year. And so we'll get everything put together, and then say on the 1st of December or on the 8th of December. Oh, the second thing that we're going to do that's different is we're going to take a Sunday morning Bible class to present it to the congregation, because we'll have more people here. You know, a lot of times we don't have folks here on Sunday night for whatever reason, and so we wanted to have as many people present on that Sunday morning for Bible class as possible. And we'll probably, we'll turn Ryan's class loose to be in here, because I think it's important for our young people to see what the church is doing and how the church does things and ought to do things. And so we'll take a Sunday morning early in December. Then once we do that, then we don't have to come back and present it on a Sunday night later on. In other words, everybody will know, and then we'll just go from there. And so I hope that'll be helpful for all of us to be actively involved in that planning. All right. So now, with regard to our study this week, you should have at some point, probably 7 or 8 pages in, maybe more, the matter of miracles or spiritual gifts in your notebook. And the reason I want to make this change, you know, we've been talking about total depravity from a Calvinistic standpoint, which all arose out of the debate back in July, is because last Thursday night I was a part of a podcast. And a podcast is just simply, it's a recording. They can be live or otherwise, and they're streamed online, and they're archived online. And I was contacted about a week ago about appearing on a podcast by a young Baptist preacher who lives in Shreveport, Louisiana. And his podcast is called The Berean Dialogues, from Berea, Acts 17:11. The Bereans were more noble than those of Thessalonica, and they searched the Scriptures daily. And so his podcast does not try to present any particular point of view, but rather he takes a topic and he finds people that believe different things about that topic and has them come on, and he asks them questions to defend their point of view. And he's was doing the subject of spiritual gifts, the miraculous spiritual gifts and miracles. And he had somebody on the week before that believed in miracles and spiritual gifts, and he defended his position for about 45 or 50 minutes. Then I was on, not to refute what the previous person said, but to teach what I believe. And so that's how that worked. And it was about 54 minutes long. It posted late Thursday evening, and you can find that if you use your smartphone a lot. You've got some kind of podcast app, and you can search the Berean Dialogues. You can probably search it online and listen to it online if you want to listen to that. It's mostly me talking, so most of you probably won't want to listen to it. You get enough of that as it is. But because of the study and the prep that I did, I thought it would be good for us to deal with some of these things. And then probably go back to Calvinism because Russ, that's the preacher's name, Russ indicated that he wanted somebody to present what the religious world refers to as Arminianism. We would be considered Arminians by those in the religious world. And I know that name doesn't mean anything to you, but basically what it means is whatever Calvinism teaches, we believe the opposite. In all 5 points of Calvinism, we believe the very opposite of what Calvinism teaches. I don't consider myself an Arminian. I consider myself a Christian. But he talked about having me on because he's going to do a series on Calvinism, and he needs somebody to present the other view. And he talked about possibly having me on to talk about baptism. And so some great opportunities, and I appreciate Russ having me on this matter, and I hope that I'll be able to be on some other occasions. But the position that I defended is known in religious circles as cessationism, from the word cease or cessation, meaning that I believe, as all of us do, that are present here tonight, that we all believe that the miraculous spiritual gifts ceased in the days shortly after the days of the apostles, and that we believe those things were brought to an end at that time. Now, within being a cessationist, there are 2 types of cessationists. What we are what are known as full cessationists. And there are what are known as partial cessationists. Now, most of your religious friends who are cessationists but don't believe in the miraculous spiritual gifts, most of them are partial cessationists. What they believe is, they believe God is still working miracles today, but He's not working them through individual people like He did in the days of the first century. In other words, almost all of our Baptist friends are cessationists, okay? They don't believe in speaking in tongues, powers of healing, prophecy, etc. But most of them do believe in miracles. And what they mean by miracles and what the Bible teaches about miracles is not the same thing. And so I had the opportunity during the podcast to explain my position because the first question was, what is full cessationism? And so I answered that question. So then he said, well, that kind of answers my second question, in that you don't believe that God heals today or works miraculous. And I said, wait a minute. I said, that's 2 different questions. Because we do believe that God heals today. But you don't have to believe in miracles to believe that God heals today. And so what that did was that offered me the opportunity to talk about providence. That God works through natural means to accomplish His will and not through miraculous means. And so Russ and I had a really good dialogue for several minutes about the matter of what it means to speak about providence as opposed to miracles. And he told me this. He said, this is off the air. Because we were 54 minutes in that podcast. And once he hit stop on the recording part, he and I talked for another 25 minutes. And he said, I've never heard anybody explain God's providence the way that you explained it. He said, I was always brought up to believe, and he says, and most of us believe, that if we pray for somebody and they get better, we believe that God has performed a miracle. And by the way, most of your religious friends believe that. They don't understand how providence works, that God does things through natural means. Sometimes we say behind the scenes. Now, having said that, C.S. Lewis wrote a book about miracles back during the time, obviously, when he was writing so many books. C.S. Lewis took the position that all healing was miraculous, even if it involved medicine. But what he failed to do was he failed to define what a Bible miracle is. And so, but that's the position that most people believe, that if you pray for somebody and they get better, God has directly intervened in a miraculous way. It hasn't occurred to them that God can intervene in a non-miraculous way. Also, the gentleman that defended miracles the week before I presented my view said that he believed it was a miracle, that the process of conversion was a miracle. That when a person is living in sin and they're changed by the power of God, that is a miracle. And so I had opportunity to address that as well. Now, what I want to do is, and I don't have my marker, well, I don't want to mess that up too much. On your notebook, at some point, you need to write 3 words. Right? The first word you need to write is, and you're going to need a little space to write beside it, okay? You need to write the word miracle. Okay? Miracle. All right? Now, somewhere next to miracle, you need to write some form of this definition. Indisputable evidence of divine intervention. Or some form of that. Also this, suspension of natural law. Suspension of natural law. And indisputable evidence of divine intervention. That is the Bible definition of a miracle. Okay? For example, when a man's been dead for 4 days, and somebody says, and Jesus says to him, Lazarus, come forth. And the man that's been dead 4 days gets up and walks out of a tomb. That is the obvious suspension of natural law and indisputably a manifestation of God's power. Also, by the way, that's, you can write, in your definition, you can write, John 12 Lazarus. Or you could write Mark 3 withered hand. Jesus healed a man in the synagogue with a withered hand. And what did he do? I mean, 1 minute the man had a withered hand, and the next minute, what did he have? A perfectly healthy hand. All right? Obviously, suspension of natural law and an indisputable manifestation of divine intervention. That is the Bible definition for miracle. All right? If we don't have those things, what don't we have? Don't have a miracle. If you don't have those things, you don't have a miracle. All right? Now, second word you need to write is providence. Providence. Just a simple definition of providence is God working through natural means to accomplish His will. God working through natural means to accomplish His will. The outsider would look at it and refer to it as luck or good fortune. But the Christian believes it's the work of God. I'll give you an example. The book of Esther is a book from beginning to end, shows God working to accomplish His will without ever one time having to perform a miracle. I mean, when you read that story and you read how Queen Vashti was deposed from being the queen, and then how all these beautiful women were gathered together and prepped for an entire year to be the next queen, and how Esther found favor with the individual who was in charge of that process, and how he helped her. She got extra special attention. And then Esther was chosen as the queen. And then you see Mordecai, her uncle, and all the things that surrounded Mordecai and the wicked man of the plot, Haman. And how everything just fell out until God accomplished His will, which was the salvation of His people against Haman's wicked plan. By the way, the name of God never appears in the book of Esther. God's name never is, the word God is not found anywhere in the book of Esther. And yet, we see God's hand in Esther from start to finish. That's providence. God never suspended natural law in the book of Esther to get from point A to point Z. But from point A to B to C to D, you can see the handiwork of God coming to fruition. You think about even when Esther exposed Haman, and the king was so angry that in a rage he left the room. He was so mad. And Haman, in an attempt to plead for his life, fell across Esther's, where she was reclining on that chair. And he fell across Esther to beg for his life. And just about the time he fell on Esther, the king walks back in. And sees Haman laying on top of his wife. And then, of course, that was the end for Haman. He was done. And by the way, Haman got hung on his own gallows that he had built for Mordecai. And so you see, item after item. Go home tonight and read Esther. Go home tonight and read Esther. A great piece of literature, a great piece of biblical literature to show how God's providence works in the lives of people. We believe that God heals providentially. God may heal providentially by a doctor, a certain doctor. I think about Wendell Winkler gave an account one time. Wendell has two sons that are preachers, but he has one that's a surgeon in Tuscaloosa. And there was a situation where a man was in the middle of surgery, and all of a sudden, just things began to fall apart for him with his vital signs and all that. And it just so happened that another surgeon either was observing or happened by and made the statement, and if I remember this correctly, as Brother Winkler told us, says, give that man potassium, his potassium's crashed. All right? And they did as that doctor said, and everything went back to the way it should have been. His heart rate and blood pressure, all those things. All right, so was that a miracle? Well, no, it wasn't a miracle. But was it providential? Yeah. Certainly providential. In other words, no miracle involved, but we can see the handiwork. We can see the handiwork of God in it. To me, the very fact that I'm at Burleson is providential. It's providential. All right? And let me just explain for you, that may not know. In October of 1995, Wade Mann called me and asked if I was interested in coming to Burleson. Just come to try out. And in October of 95, I wasn't interested. We had our work going on in Tennessee, and we were happy, and we thought things were going pretty well, and so we politely declined the invitation. Well, toward the end of the year, things got bad for us. All right. By the first part of '96, it was so bad that we knew we had to leave, and we resigned. I submitted my resignation the first week of January, effective January 31st. In other words, as of January 31st, I was going to be out of work. All right. Rhonda was at home, stayed at home with the kids. I submitted my resignation. Next day I called Wade Mann. I said, Wade, y'all still need a preacher? He said, we do. I said, would you be interested in me coming down? He said, we would. And then, some knucklehead decides to try out to preach on Super Bowl Sunday. That'd be me. January the 28th, 1996, Super Bowl Sunday. I came down to try out. Sick as a dog. Run fever and everything. Just crazy sick. But everything played out. Everything really worked out. We had a good visit, and we liked everybody, and everybody seemed to like us. And on Wednesday night, the day that my resignation was valid, the church at Burleson called and said, we want you to come. All right? The next day, we stuck a for sale sign out in front of our house. Didn't even call a realtor. 10 days later, our house sold. We sold our house on about the 10th of February, and we moved on the 16th. And everything that we had in Tennessee had been left behind. And now here we are almost 24 years later. Now, can I prove that God had a hand in that? No. I can't prove it, can I? I can't prove it. Ask me if I believe it. See, there's the matter of providence. The Christian cannot prove providence, but he can believe it. Roy Lanier Jr. told us this in our Bible class on Thursday night at Winfield Bible class one time. It's been at least 15 years ago. He said, always wait 10 to 15 years before you credit God's providence with anything. In other words, go back and take the long view and see, how those things work. And I've always done that. But from the time we got here, I've always believed it. And the longer I've been here, the more I believe it. I believe in God's providence. All right, so there's word number 2, providence. God working behind the scenes through natural means to bring about His will. All right, now, the last thing I want you to think of is the word spiritual. Spiritual. All right. Some might refer to it as supernatural, but I prefer the word spiritual. All right. There are things that are spiritual, but are not miraculous. All right. That's the conversion of the human heart. It's spiritual. Is it physical? No, it's not physical. Is it miraculous? No, it's not miraculous. But it's spiritual. Right? So spiritual things are those that fall outside of what is natural, but also outside of what is miraculous. The forgiveness of sins is a spiritual matter, right? The conversion of the human heart is a spiritual matter. Not natural, not miraculous. Receiving the forgiveness of sins is a spiritual matter. Not physical, not miraculous. And so I think there's a distinction that needs to be made there as well. That there are some things that are spiritual, but that are non-miraculous. We can pray for things that are spiritual. We can pray for things that pertain to providence. We should not pray for the miraculous. Right? So we can pray for the spiritual. Those that are unfaithful to the Lord, we pray for their return. Those that have not obeyed the gospel, we can pray for them to obey. And we can pray for the providence of God to bring about those things, right? You know, if we have a loved one who is not faithful to the Lord, or we have a loved one who has not obeyed the gospel, you know, and we're doing our best to help them, we can pray for the providence of God. And by the way, we do this, but we never use the terminology. How many times have we prayed or we heard somebody pray that something might be said or done to bring about repentance or to bring about obedience to the gospel? We pray that, right? We pray. We're praying for Providence. We prayed it for 27 years on Rhonda's daddy's behalf, that something might be said or done. Well, we weren't praying. At times, I guess we thought we might have been praying for a miracle. I mean, I say that tongue in cheek, but you know what I mean. When you pray for something 25, 26, 27 years and it doesn't happen, you think that you almost in your mind think, man, it's going to take a miracle. Well, the religious world would say, yeah, it took a miracle. We don't know what it was or what. But we pray for the providence of God to bring about a spiritual result as well. And so we can pray for the spiritual. We can pray for the providential. We should not pray for the miraculous. Right? And then, of course, the one verse that should be in your notebook with regard to the miraculous, and I would add this verse. You know, next to providence, write Esther. Right? Write Esther. Right? Next to miracle, write Acts 4:16. Acts 4:16. Where those who were unbelievers readily confessed that a notable miracle has been performed by these men is evident to everyone that is in Jerusalem, and we cannot deny it. So we find three things there with regard to a miracle. Right? It's notable. In that case, they're talking about the lame man that had been healed in Acts 3. It was manifest. It's observable. You can see it. It's been manifest to everybody in Jerusalem. In other words, this thing was not done in secret. And then lastly, it's undeniable. You can't say that nobody can ever say, well, Lazarus wasn't really dead. That was just, Lazarus wasn't really dead. Oh yeah, he was really dead. No, it's undeniable. Even his own flesh and blood said, he's been dead 4 days. He smells. I mean, that's what it says. He smells. What did Jesus say? Roll the stone away. Roll the stone away. And so that is undeniable. When the woman whose son died, and they were carrying his casket down the road, and he stopped that parade of sorts. I don't mean a parade as in a celebration. I just mean a parade as in a long line of people. And that young man got out of that box. Nobody can say, "Oh, he wasn't really dead." Or when a man has a withered hand, and that hand is fit, nobody. Well, he was just faking. By the way, did I tell you all about the fake healing I saw? The fake healing. You can find this on Facebook. You can find it on YouTube. A little over a week ago, a lady here in Marion County posted a video of a woman in Africa, and she had an unbelievably distorted right arm. I mean, it was gruesome looking. All right? Well, here comes this preacher, and he's healing her. And they're hollering, and they're shouting, and they're carrying on. And little bit by little bit, 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 all of a sudden her arm gets straight. That made for some pretty compelling video. I'm not going to lie. I mean, it looked very compelling. All right? And she posted this video, and in that video she said, "This is the power available to us today, brothers and sisters. This is the power available for us today." There's only one problem. The week before, I was in Dallas, Texas, and I saw a different video of that same woman being healed of that same thing in another location. I saw that same, because when I saw the video that the local lady posted, and I saw that woman's arm, my radar went up. Because when I saw her being healed, she was in an open air market area. When the second video was posted, she was in a church building. All right? So then I just posted underneath there. I said, this is interesting that I just saw this same lady being healed last week of the same thing at a different place. And by the way, that same video was posted in a Facebook group that I'm a part of that led to this podcast. That same lady. I did a little research when I saw it. There are 5 different videos of this same woman. 5 different videos of this same woman being healed of the same thing in all 5 videos in 5 different locations. Now, get this. Late last week, somebody interviewed her. You know what she said? She said, well, I'm being healed, but it comes back. I'm being healed, but it comes back. Did y'all hear what Grace said? Does she get money every time? Yes. There's the heart of the matter. Those guys are paying her to be healed. She's getting paid, and they're getting paid.
To be a good actress.
To be a good actress. That's exactly right. Yeah, those people very, very much convinced. But see, here's the thing. This is what I've been saying for years and years. That every time we hear guys reporting about miracles, they're in South America, they're in Africa, and they're just giving these anecdotal reports with no evidence. And yet, there's 7 billion people toting cell phones around the world. And nobody ever manages to catch a miracle on a cell phone. And the one time that they did, 5 of them caught it in 5 different places. See, the very method that could be used to prove miracles in other places around the world has actually shown that those things are fraudulent. That they are fraudulent. And so I just thought that was interesting. I said she'd been healed 5 times, but it kept coming back. Just like in the Bible, right? Just like the lame man that had to be healed 5 times. You know, just like the woman with an issue of blood that had to be healed 5 times. Just like the leper who had to be healed 5 times. When did we ever read in the Bible about somebody being healed by Jesus and having a relapse?
Lazarus been in trouble with Peter. Had been raised 5 times.
Yeah, Lazarus raised from the dead 5 times. Yeah, they healed him, raised him from the dead, but he had a relapse. Now, eventually Lazarus did have a relapse. He did die again at some point, but he didn't die no 5 times. He didn't die 5 times. And so we see from Acts 4 and verse 16 that a true Bible miracle is notable. In other words, you know exactly what has happened. Secondly, it's done in the presence of witnesses, and then it's undeniable.
I think people just get confused. Most people who just want to believe in miracles.
Right.
Anything that they don't understand is automatically a miracle.
Right, and we talked about that on the podcast. That just because something happens and we can't explain it doesn't mean it's a miracle. And the example that I used in the podcast was this. It was either last week or week before last. A commercial vehicle struck a parked state trooper's vehicle in northwest Georgia. And I saw a picture of that trooper's SUV, and it was crushed like a Coke can. And I think that guy only received minor injuries. But if you looked at that SUV, your initial response is, there ain't no way nobody survived that. And yet he sustained only minor injuries. But what will people say? It was a miracle.
And that's what most people believe, those type of miracles. Most people don't believe the kind that
That's
other
right.
people perform on, that
Right.
humans
Yeah.
perform.
They deny the miraculous in the healing aspect, but they affirm the miraculous in the general or nebulous aspect. But again, you have to go back to what defines a miracle.
They don't see a miracle as undeniable. Because it could be denied.
Right.
That could
Somebody
just
could
be
lie in a car
denied.
wreck, it could be denied as a miracle.
Right.
Because if there was some way of seeing what went on in that car wreck, then you might have a little understanding of what really happened.
That's right.
Or it
Some
could have just
people
been
just
blood.
went, I don't understand it, so it's a miracle.
Yeah. But there is a physical explanation as to why that trooper didn't get killed. I mean, there's a physical explanation for it. But when you look at it from the outside, you think, man, there's no way anybody lived through that. But yet, he did. You know, when I was a kid, I used to read, my favorite book to read was the Guinness Book of World Records. I got somewhere in my library, I got the 1976 edition of the Guinness Book of World Records. You know, and every year they released a new copy of the Guinness Book of World Records. And I remember there was some dude that fell out of an airplane and fell about 6,000 feet and lived. He held the world record for longest fall and survived. You know, but what would happen if a man fell 6,000 feet out of an airplane and lived? What are they going to say? Miracle. But there's a physical explanation as to how that man lived. It was, in other words,
right up here in the field where a man airplane and I tore all the pieces up through yonder.
yeah.
Saw where he hit the ground.
Did he live?
He was about that deep. It stuck up the ground.
Woo. But did he live?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
Wasn't no miracle in that.
Wasn't no miracle. But there's an explanation for how that guy fell 6,000 feet and lived, right? There's an explanation. In other words, not a suspension of natural law. And so, you know, if we can get people to understand, and let me just say this, and I'll stop. People have a hard time when you say that God doesn't do things or won't do things anymore. Even when God himself said that he's not going to do those things. Does that make sense? I mean,
Well, you're not saying he can't.
you're not saying he can't, you're just saying that he doesn't. And by the way, I made this clear in the podcast. I'm not saying that he never did. But I'm saying that he doesn't now. But people have a hard time to think about, if you say, God doesn't work, because what? They've been trained all their life. All their life they've been trained that God still works the miraculous, but they don't define it the way the Bible defines it. And so, you know, we can help people come a long way by again, those three words. Miracle, providence, and spiritual. And being able to explain those three things. Right? Now, Lord willing, next Sunday night will be the 17th. So come back the following week. We'll look at some of the verses that are sometimes used to teach that the miraculous is still going on today. And then we'll examine those just in the same way we've been doing with our notebook from the beginning. All right. Any questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
What about these when people say, well, this wasn't his time to go?
It wasn't his time, or it was his time.
Wasn't.
Yeah, either one. It goes either way. I guess it was his time, or I guess it wasn't his time. I don't accept that, because one way or another it deals with fatalism, and by fatalism I mean fate or predestination. You know, people use that. You know, in other words, if it's your time to go, you're going to go no matter what. Well, see, that deals with a fatalistic view of life, that God's already determined when you're going to die. Now, God knows when you're going to die, but that doesn't mean God's determined when you're going to die, and as if you don't have any choice in the matter. And so when people say, well, I guess it was his time to go, or I guess it wasn't his time to go, actually they're dealing with a fatalistic view of the world and a deterministic view of God that the Bible does not teach.
Just an example of that. When several years ago, a guy that I know pretty well lost his son in a car wreck.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it had some pretty big effects on him, but we were under a tornado one day, and we stopped, and he was standing out in the middle of his parking lot there at his little shop. And we asked him if he was going to, told him we better get storm cellar, there was a tornado, they said possibly head away. He said, well, I've done learned if it's my time to go, it's just my time to go.
Mm-hmm.
And a buddy of mine, his dad looked at him and said, you know, God also gave you enough common sense to
Gave you enough sense to get out of a tornado.
Yeah.
But see, he had determined, and this is a problem, he had determined that God had taken his son. Right?
Yeah.
He determined that God had taken his son.
Yeah. People believe that.
But people believe that, but that's not true.
People say that he was needed more, you know.
Yeah, God needed him more in heaven than needed. Yeah, people ought not say that.
I don't think they have to understand what they're calling God when they do that.
Right? Yeah, they don't understand what they're accusing God of doing.
Yeah,
Look,
exactly.
God don't kill people. God don't kill people.
And I don't believe it steps in and makes allowances either.
That's right.
Because if you did, that would go back and make you a respecter of person.
That's right. And see, therein lies one of the arguments. And I know I'm over time, but I want to make mention of this. Is that one argument that people make about or against God is that bad thing. This was a young girl that I studied with in Jacksonville when I was staying in a hotel up there. She was one of the workers there, and I had a Bible study with her. And she said, my grandpa, she talked about her grandpa, and he was one of the sorriest characters that ever lived, by her own definition. And her grandmother was a churchgoer and one of the finest people that ever lived. And yet, her grandmother died way too early, in life, and had a horrible death. And her grandfather lived a terrible life and lived to be, way on up there, and basically died in his sleep. And she said, something bad happened to my grandma, and she was a good person, and nothing bad happened to my grandpa, and he was a bad person. I have a hard time accepting that God, basically let this one and not this one. And the point that we need to make is that if we expected God to step in every situation, there would be no consequence for our choices. Right? If God's going to step in and keep bad things from happening to good people in every situation, what kind of world would that be? If God was intervening every time a car was fixing to hit somebody, or an airplane was fixing to crash, or somebody was fixing to shoot somebody else, murder somebody. I mean, what kind of world would that be if God was intervening in every single situation to make sure that nothing bad ever happened to good people?
You wouldn't need a heaven or heaven.
That, and it'd be chaos. I mean, think about the chaos if God's intervening in every single situation, every single time. I mean, plus, if something bad did happen to somebody that they thought was good, they'd say, uh-oh. Must not have been as good as we thought. So there's a lot of problems with that. If I was a good person and somebody shoved me off the top of a building, is God going to intervene? Kind of like Satan said to Jesus, in their hands he'll bear thee up, lest at any time you dash your foot against a stone. And so, I'll just be honest with you, I don't want to live in that world, because it takes the consequence of personal choice completely out of the equation, whether it be a good person or a bad person.
And if a good person dies and they were in the right relationship, why would you not want them to go?
That's right. When a good person dies, even if it's in bad circumstances, they're far better off.
Man said for me to die is gain.
Yeah, Paul said, for me to die is gain, and precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints, Psalm 116:15. And even as bad as some of it is, those people are better. Paul said, I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better. But for me to stay with you is more needful. But he knew what the better side of that was. And so, but yeah, I don't want to live in a world where God removes the consequence of personal choice, because that'd just be chaos, absolute chaos. And so that's just a little more to think about. All right, so in 2 weeks, we'll deal with the passages and show what they teach. All right, I'll turn.